Hello everyone. So let's start the fifth hour of optics. In this hour, we will first complete up whatever is left out for lenses. That is combination of lenses and combination of lenses and mirrors. And then we will move on and talk about prisms. So without wasting time, let's start with the first thing, that is combination of lenses. So let's say you have got multiple lenses. The good thing about lenses is that their power can be added up directly. So, for a system of lenses, the net power and net focal length goes as the net power of combination is nothing but the algebraic sum of individual powers. We have learned this in last hour that for converging lenses, the power is positive, and for diverging lenses, the concave lenses, the power is negative. And when we try to find the effective power, you simply need to add up power. So the powers are directly additive. If you take first lens of let's say power 3 diopter and you place one more lens of let's say power 2 diopter. Now this combination becomes a single lens of power 5 diopter. So now this is how you can find out the effective power of the combination of lenses. We know that for a lens, power equals to 1 upon focal length. For converging lenses, we take the focal length as positive. For diverging lenses, we take the focal length as negative. So in place of power of combination, you can write 1 upon focal length of combination. In place of P1, you can write 1 by F1. In case of P2, you can write 1 by F2 and so on. So you will say that 1 upon the focal length of effective system equals to 1 by F1 plus 1 by F2 plus 1 by F3 and so on. Now beta, if you have got two thin lenses, if you have got only two lenses, then you will say that the power effective will be nothing but the power of first one plus the power of second one. And when asked what will be the effective focal length, you will say that 1 upon effective focal length will be equals to 1 by F1 plus 1 by F2. Now you can write 1 by F equals to 1 by F1 plus 1 by F2. This can also be written as 1 by F equals to F2 plus F1 upon F1 F2. Taking reciprocals both the side, you will say that F equals to F1 F2 upon F1 plus F2. So you will say that the equivalent focal length will be nothing but F1 F2 upon F1 plus F2. Do understand that this formula should be used only when the lenses are placed in contact. They are placed close together. There is no gap between the lenses. So what to do when there is gap between the lenses? If they give gap between the lenses, then if an object is placed, find the image of the object made by the first lens. The image made by the first lens will act as the object for the second lens. So if they give you multiple lenses but there is some separation between them, then do not use this formula. Then find the image by the first lens. The image found by the first lens will act as the object for the second lens and continue applying the lens formula twice. Now but the next thing, if two lenses of equal focal length but opposite nature are in contact, so think that one of them is converging, another one is diverging, and they have got equal magnitude of focal length. So if the power of first one is plus x, the power of second one will be minus x. And you know that power is directly additive. So you will say that the effective power will be plus x plus minus x, that becomes 0. So if the power will be 0, you will say that focal length will be infinite. So if two lenses of equal focal length but opposite nature are in contact, then combination will behave as a plain glass plate. Why? Because the effective power will be 0. So for such a combination, the focal length will be infinity and the power will be 0. Now, talking about cutting off lenses. Let's say you have got this lens. The lens has a focal length f and a power p. So you know that the power of the lens is nothing but 1 upon f. Okay, sir. Now we have divided this lens into two parts by cutting it as shown in the figure. So once you have cut it, once you have divided it, you will get two lenses. Now tell me, if this single lens has a power p, then one of these individual lenses will have how much power? Sir, we have learned that if we shoot here rays, parallel rays, then both the surfaces converge. If I now think about only one of them, the convergence of rays will take only on one surface. So it will converge less, so the power will be less. Moreover, if this is equiconvex lens, then due to symmetry, both the parts will have same power. Let's say both the part have got power x and x. When placed in contact, their combined system becomes an equiconvex lens. And this equiconvex lens will have a power of x plus x, that will be 2x. So you can say that P equals to 2x. So the power of one of the lens has to be P by 2. If the power of one of the lens will be P by 2, what can you say about focal length? So power equals to 1 by focal length. So if the power becomes half, it means that the focal length becomes double. So each one of them will have power P by 2 and focal length 2f. If you cut the same lens along the principal axis, and now you get two small lenses. Now tell me, for these two, what will be the power? So you will say that from the lens maker formula, we know that 1 by f equals to mu L by mu S minus 1 into 1 by R1 minus 1 by R2. If I think of only one lens, the upper part, then I say that it has still the same lens material. The surrounding is still same. And the radius of curvature for the left surface and right surface is still same. Though the lower half is missing, no doubt. But the radius of curvature is still the same. That's why beta, the power of both of them will be same. As both of them will have same power as the original lens, both of them will have the same focal length as the original length. So the power will be same P and the focal length will be same F. When I answered this question for the first time in life, I answered it using the knowledge that I am constantly wearing a lens. If I take this lens and look only through some part of it, hide the other part, I still see the image clearly. And the reason is that whatever is the power of the complete lens, that same power is of one part of the lens if cut this way. Now let's say once you have cut it, now you are rearranging the parts. Let's say after dividing it into two parts, you have rearranged it this way. The second lens has been turned and kept this way. Now can you tell me what will be the effective power of this combination? Sir, we know that whether you keep the plano-convex lens this way or whether you keep the plano-convex lens this way, if parallel rays are hit, both of them will converge them, and that too at the same distance. So, changing the orientation in this situation does not change the power of the lens. This still remains a converging lens. So you will say that this one has power P by 2, this one has power P by 2. So their combination will have power P by 2 plus P by 2, that will be P. And if the power of combination is still P, the focal length of combination will be still F. What if you combine the two parts after cutting this way? So sir, orientation doesn't matter. This is still a converging lens of power P by 2. This is still a converging lens of power P by 2. And when placed together, they will act effectively as a single lens of power P by 2 plus P by 2. A single lens of power P. As the power remains the same, we can say that the focal length remains the same, and for this case as well, the effective focal length will be F. What if you have divided the lens this way, and after dividing you have got two parts, and you place these two parts, turning the lower half and keep it next to the upper half this way. So you will say if a ray of light is hit, this first one will send it towards the optical axis, converge it, and the second one will converge it further. So sir, both of them will bend the incident ray towards the optical axis as if their individual powers are adding up. And we know that their individual power is P and P. So the combined power will be P plus P, that is 2P. And if the power becomes double, the focal length becomes half. So when placed this way, the effective focal length will be F by 2. The power becomes double, the focal length becomes half. And now the case which students usually answer wrong, this case. If the second lens is kept such that it is here, now what will be the effective power? Students think that the effective power will be still P plus P. the effective power will be 2p. So the focal length will be f by 2, and here is where it goes wrong. Think of a ray hitting here. This upper part of the original lens send it towards the optical axis. And if a parallel ray hits the lower part sends it towards the optical axis. So if a parallel ray hits here, the upper part will send it down and the lower part will send it up, making it go parallel to the original ray. Hence you say, if kept this way, the two lenses nullify out each other's effect. So the effective power becomes 0, and as the effective power becomes 0, the effective focal length becomes infinity. So this case is crucial case, keep it in mind. You can approximate this case to two identical prisms. Rays like this. So the first one bends the ray downward, the second one bends it upwards, and the final emergent ray is parallel to the incident ray. That's why their effective power becomes 0 and effective focal length becomes infinite. So now we will talk about silvering of lenses, which can also be understood as lens and mirror combination. Now, I know that majority of students find this particular part tough. It's easy. You just need to remember two definitions. The first one, the power of mirror equals to minus 1 by focal length of mirror. For a concave mirror, the value of f, the position of focus with respect to pole, is negative. So f is negative. So the power for concave mirror comes out to be positive. And for a convex mirror, the power is negative because the focal length of a convex mirror is positive. Why? Because the position of focus with respect to pole is positive. So the power of mirror comes out to be negative. Now let's say you have a lens. For the sake of understanding, I am using here a plano-convex lens. Now let's say we have silvered one side of this plano-convex lens. Either we can silver this concave surface or we can silver the flat surface. So if we silver the curved surface, we can think of this to be a combination of lens plus mirror. So once you have silvered the curved surface, you can think it to be combination of lens plus mirror. And even if you silver the flat surface, you can again think of it to be a combination of lens plus mirror. How? See. In the first case, you will take it as a combination of plano-convex lens plus a concave mirror. In the second case, you will think of it to be a combination of plano-convex lens plus a plane mirror. Now sir, how to find the effective focal length? I have a bigger question here. This combination will act like a lens or a mirror. So what is the difference between lens and mirror? If you have a lens, you shoot a ray of light. Whether the ray of light moves towards the optical axis or away from it, but the ray keeps on moving forward, it gets refracted. But if you have a mirror and you shoot a ray of light towards it, it gets reflected. It moves in the opposite direction after the reflection. So sir, what are you trying to say here? I'm just asking you a simple question. Tell me, once you have silvered a lens, it will act like a lens or it will act like a mirror? So see, when we hit a ray of light, first refraction will take place at the first surface, then it will get reflected, then again the refraction will take place, yes. But the final emergent ray moves in the direction opposite to the initial incident ray, right? So overall, this lens plus mirror combination acts like a mirror. So do understand that the lens plus mirror combination acts overall like a mirror. So on silvering the surface of the lens, it behaves as a mirror. So a lens plus mirror combination acts overall like a mirror. The power of the silvered lens, which acts like a mirror, is given by. Now the beauty of power is that power can be added up directly. So you will say that once you have silvered one of the surface, it acts overall like a mirror. So you will say the power of the mirror effective, the power of the effective mirror formed by lens and mirror combination is nothing but power of mirror plus 2 times power of lens. Power of mirror plus 2 times power of lens. Sir, why 2 times power of lens? Because reflection takes place only once, but refraction takes place twice. Reflection takes place only once, while refraction due to the lens takes place twice. So if you have a lens and a mirror, let's say, if you shoot some rays of light over this combination, so first the lens will refract, then the mirror will reflect, then the lens will again refract. And the beauty of power is that power can be added up directly. So you will say that overall this combination acts like a mirror. And the power of the mirror formed effective is nothing but power of mirror plus 2 times the power of lens. And if you know how to write the power of mirror and the power of lens, game over right here. So let's see one example to understand this better. Let's say we have a double convex lens and that double convex lens has been silvered. So let's say you have here an equiconvex lens of radius of curvature for the curved surface to be r, and let's say one of the surface has been silvered. Now you know that once you have silvered one of the surface, this is as good as having a lens plus a mirror. And the overall nature of this system will be nothing but a mirror. So sir, how to find the effective focal length? See, remember the formula we are going to use. The formula is power of mirror effective is nothing but power of mirror plus 2 times the power of lens, because the ray gets refracted twice. That's why 2 times the power of lens. And now you need to know how to write the power of lens and how to write the power of mirror. So first thing, let's focus on lens. If we have a biconvex lens, equiconvex lens of, let's say, radius of curvature of the surface to be r and r, how will you write the power of this lens? So sir, from the lens maker formula we know that 1 by f equals to mu l by mu s minus 1, taking the lens material refractive index as mu and surrounding as air 1, mu l by mu s minus 1 into 1 by r1 minus 1 by r2. R1 will be taken positive if we assume incident rays to be coming from here, and R2 will be taken as negative. So 1 by R1, in place of R1 write R, minus 1 by R2, in place of R2 write minus R. So here you get 1 by F equals to mu minus 1 into 1 by R plus 1 by R, that becomes 2 by R. Or better, the focal length comes out to be R upon 2 times of mu minus 1. So for the lens you will say FL, the focal length of lens, equals to the radius of curvature for the surfaces of this equiconvex lens upon 2 times of mu minus 1. If you know the focal length of lens, you know the power. Power for lens is nothing but 1 upon focal length of lens, no minus sign. So the power of this lens will be the reciprocal of the focal length. So the power of lens will be nothing but 2 times of mu minus 1 upon r. This will be the power of this lens. Now we need to focus on power of the mirror. Because we know power of lens, we will substitute it here. If we know the power of the mirror, we will substitute it here, and that will help us find the effective power of the mirror form. Now, to write the power of mirror, you need to know what is the focal length of mirror. This is a concave mirror. For concave mirror, F is taken as positive or negative. So F is negative because F is the position of focus with respect to pole. And we know that the focus for concave mirror will be here. At how much distance? At a distance r by 2. So what will you write F as? Plus r by 2 or minus r by 2? The focal length of mirror in this case must be taken as minus r by 2. Optics is easy. What people do wrong here is that they do not write this minus. They do not write this minus and they turn their plus 4 to minus 1. So better be very cautious about sign in optics. Now, once you have placed this minus, now how to write the power of mirror? Sir, we know that power of mirror is nothing but minus of 1 upon focal length of mirror. And in place of focal length of mirror, substitute minus r by 2. So what you get is minus of 1 upon minus r by 2. That gives you 2 by r. So you will say that the power of mirror will be nothing but 2 upon r. Now you know the power of lens. Now you know the power of mirror. You can find out the power of the mirror effective. How? Substitute the data. Substitute the power of lens, substitute the power of mirror. So you will say that the power of mirror effective will be nothing but 2 times the power of lens. So 2 times of 2 into mu minus 1 upon r plus the power of mirror only once. So plus 2 by r. Now here you can see that I can take r common in the denominator. Here I have got 2 into 2, 4. So this becomes 4 mu minus 4 plus 2. So that gives me 4 mu minus 2 upon r. I can take the 2 common. That becomes 2 times of 2 mu minus 1 upon r. So that is same as 2 times of 2 mu minus 1 upon r. Now I know what is the power of the effective mirror form. And for a mirror, we write that power equals to minus 1 times the focal length of mirror. So you will write this 2 times of 2 mu minus 1 upon r, which is the power of the effective mirror form, equals to minus times 1 upon its focal length. So here you can say that f equals to minus r upon 2 times of 2 mu minus 1. So the focal length of the effective mirror formed is nothing but minus r upon 2 times of 2 mu minus 1. Now this is one of the example. My heart tells me to take 10, 12 examples so that you become good at the sign convention. But I do not have that type of time. So what I suggest you is that people find it difficult. Master it. It's an easy thing. All you have to be cautious is about sign. Now there is one more small topic that we need to cover in lenses, and that is called aberration. Now lenses produce two types of aberration: chromatic aberration as well as spherical aberration. While spherical mirror produces only spherical aberration. What is the meaning of chromatic aberration? Chromatic aberrations are the one which pertains to the aberration due to color. We have already learned that for different colors, the refractive index is not same from the Cauchy's formula. We have learned that the refractive index equals to A plus B upon lambda square plus C upon lambda raised to the power of 4 and so on. So the greater the lambda, the lower the refractive index. Out of the visible light, red has the highest wavelength. Since red has the highest wavelength, red has the least refractive index. So we say that the wavelength of red is greater than the wavelength of violet, and hence the refractive index for red is less than the refractive index for violet. Now bachcho, if the refractive index will be more, the power of the lens will be more or less. Now this is not rocket science if you have ever got into a shop to buy lenses. While selling you lenses, the glasses, they tell you that this glass has got higher refractive index because higher refractive index glasses are more powerful. And do understand that for violet, the refractive index is more than red. So if you take a lens and shoot white light on it, I want you to guess for which color the power of the lens will be more. So the power of the lens will be more for the color for which it has got greater refractive index. So violet gets converged the closest and red gets converged the farthest. For red, the focal length is highest, the power is least. For violet, the focal length is least, the power is highest. Greater the refractive index, greater the power. So once the white light passes through this lens, the light gets converged. But due to the difference in refractive index for different colors, different color of light gets converged at different places. Here to make you understand, I have taken only the two extreme colors, the red and the violet. No doubt there is whole spectrum Vibgyor here. Okay, so there is indigo, there is green, there is blue, there is everything on this line. Now we can see that different colors have got different focal length. If white light falls on this lens, different color of light gets converged at different points, giving us a colorful image rather than white image. So the image is said to be blurred, and this type of aberration is called chromatic aberration. So image of a white object is colored and blurred because refractive index and hence the focal length of a lens is different for different colors. This defect is called chromatic aberration. Chromatic because pertaining to color. Spherical pertaining to the shape. Lenses also show spherical aberrations. While teaching you mirrors, I said that only the near parallel rays after hitting the mirror passes through the focus. Only the near parallel rays, not the farther one, right? And we said that this aberration is called spherical aberration. Lenses also have got spherical surface. So lenses even show spherical aberrations as well. Now, bachcho, since the refractive index for violet is greater than the refractive index for red, the focal length for red is highest. The power over for red is least. The focal length for red has the highest magnitude and the focal length for violet is least. Now we define a quantity called dispersive power. The dispersive power is defined as focal length for red, which is the highest, minus focal length for violet upon the mean focal length. And we take the mean focal length for yellow color. So upon focal length of yellow. So we have written dispersive power omega into the focal length for yellow equals to focal length for red minus focal length for violet. You can rearrange it and write that the dispersive power equals to focal length for red minus the focal length for violet upon the focal length for yellow. For different colors, since the refractive index is different, we get different focal lengths. Now, bachcho, we can say that Fy, the focal length for violet, is nothing but the geometric mean of the focal length for red and violet. So remember this, the mean focal length, the focal length for yellow is nothing but the geometric mean for the focal length for red and violet. The geometric mean of two numbers A and B is nothing but root AB. So if the focal length for, let's say, violet is 2 centimeter, the focal length for red is 3 centimeter, then the mean focal length, that is the focal length for yellow color, will be under root of 2 into 3, that will be root 6 centimeter. Now, bachcho, how to remove chromatic aberration? The best way to remove chromatic aberration is to use monochromatic light. If you use only red light rather than white light, the red light will converge only at one spot and you will get a bright image, a non-blurred image. So how to remove chromatic aberration? Remove different colors, use a monochromatic light. But this is not what we want. If we use a monochromatic light, you will have to look at the images of everything only in a single color. So physicists use a different method, and that is called achromatic combination of lenses. To remove this defect, that is for achromatism, we use two or more lenses in contact in place of a single lens, such that the focal length finally matches up. So that's called achromatic combination. Now, when we do achromatic combination, it is necessary if one of the lens is converging, another one has to be diverging. And the mathematical condition for achromatism is that the two lenses chosen should be such that omega 1 by f1 plus omega 2 by f2 should be equals to 0. Here f1 and f2 are their mean focal length. So omega 1 by f1 plus omega 2 by f2 should be equal to 0, and this condition is called the condition of achromatic combination. If you choose two lenses with such value of dispersive power and mean focal length such that omega 1 by f1 plus omega 2 by f2 equals to 0, then the final image formed by them will be free from chromatic aberrations. Do remember one last line. Lenses show both chromatic aberration as well as spherical aberration, while spherical mirrors show only and only spherical aberrations. So now let's start the hero of the hour, that is prism. Let's say you have a prism and the three corners are A, B and C, and a ray of light comes and hit it. The ray of light is moving in a rarer medium and now trying to get inside a denser medium. So what will happen? The ray of light will bend towards the normal. So visualize the normal at the point of refraction, and this ray of light will bend towards the normal. Now let's say the angle of incidence is I, and this ray after bending makes an angle R1 with the normal. This ray, once inside prism, keeps on moving and then hits the second surface. And at the interface, again refraction will take place. This time, this ray of light, which is right now moving in the denser medium, is now coming out and trying to move in the rarer medium. Again, refraction will take place. So again, think of the normal. And this time, as the ray is moving from denser medium to the rarer medium, it will bend away from the normal. So let's say the ray of light comes out and the angles are R2 and E. Let's say this top angle, the apex angle of the prism, is called A. First of all, a little bit of focus on the terminology. What is I? The angle of incidence. What is E? The angle of emergence. That is the angle made by the final emergent ray with the normal. That is called the angle of emergence. What is A? A is called the angle of prism, or sometimes the apex angle of prism, or sometimes called the refracting angle of prism. So if in a question they say that the refracting angle of the prism is 42 degree, it means that the apex angle is 42 degree. The next thing we need to talk about is what is R1 and R2. So R1 and R2 are the internal angle of refraction. So angle of refraction which are there. So this is standard terminology. There are two important things that every child should know in prism. The first thing is that the sum of these two internal angle of refraction is equal to the apex angle. So the first thing that everyone should know is R1 plus R2 equals to A. R1 plus R2 equals to A. Why? Think it. This line is normal. This line is normal. This means that this normal and the surface is perpendicular. And this second normal and the second surface is perpendicular. If I ask you what is this angle, you will say that, sir, this angle has to be 90 minus R1. If I ask you what is this angle, you will say that, sir, this angle has to be 90 minus R2. And you can see that the three angles A, 90 minus R1 and 90 minus R2 are internal angles of a triangle. So can I say that A plus 90 minus R1 plus 90 minus R2 has to be equal to 180 degree. The sum of the internal angles has to be equal to 180 degree. 90 plus 90 becomes 180. So on the left hand side you have got 180, right hand side you have got 180, they get cancelled. So what you get is A equals to R1 plus R2, and this is one important thing that every child should know. So the sum of the internal refracting angles is nothing but equal to apex angle. So let's say for one given condition, apex angle is 40 degree and a ray of light hits, and after the first refraction you get that this angle is 30 degree. Then I can say that the second angle of refraction must be equal to 10 degree because their sum has to be equal to the apex angle. Now bachcho, second thing that we need to know is what is the deviation. Now the ray gets refracted at two surfaces, at the surface 1, at the surface 2. Due to both the refractions, the ray suffers some deviation. Let's say due to the first refraction, it suffers a deviation delta 1. And then due to the second refraction, it suffers a deviation delta 2. So you will say that the net deviation will be equals to delta 1 plus delta 2. The deviation on the first surface plus the deviation on the second surface. You can write the deviation on the first surface, delta 1, as this angle is I, so the opposite angle should also be I, and this angle of deviation must be equals to I minus R1. So the deviation on the left surface is I minus R1. And if we want to get the deviation on the second surface, then this ray was trying to go straight and it bent. So the deviation produced on the second surface is nothing but E minus R2, the angle of emergence minus R2. So this deviation is nothing but E minus R2. And you will say that the net deviation delta is nothing but deviation on the first surface plus the deviation on the second surface. The deviation on the first surface is I minus R1. The deviation on the second surface is E minus R2. So you will say that the net deviation is I minus R1 plus E minus R2. That can also be written as I plus E minus R1 minus R2. That can also be written as I plus E minus times of R1 plus R2. And we know that the sum of the internal angle of refraction is nothing but the apex angle. So we can say that the net deviation is I plus E minus A. So you need to mug up this second thing, and this is also equally important, that the net deviation produced by the prism is nothing but angle of incidence plus the angle of emergence minus the apex angle, I plus E minus A. Now kids, for the surface AC, for the refraction on first surface, if I take the surrounding medium to be made up of air and refractive index 1, can I say that 1 sine I equals to mu sine R1? So can I say that refractive index has to be sine I by sine R1, bring this sine R1 down. And similarly, applying the Snell's law for the second surface, when the refraction takes place on the second surface, taking the surrounding refractive index again as 1, I can say that mu sine R2 equals to 1 sine E. So the refractive index can also be written as sine E upon sine R2. So I have done nothing great here. I have just applied Snell's law independently on first surface and on second surface. Now let's talk more about prism. So what is the deviation produced through a prism? We have just learned that the deviation is nothing but I plus E minus A. Now beta, if we change I, R1 changes. As R1 changes, R2 must change because their sum has to be constant equals to A. So if I change I, R1 and R2 changes, and as R2 changes, E changes. So for different value of angle of incidence, we get different value of angle of emergence. If we plot the graph of the deviation in the ray versus the angle of incidence, if we plot the graph of the deviation in the ray versus the angle of incidence, the graph goes something like this. Now, here you can see that there is a particular value of angle of incidence for which deviation comes out to be minimum. So, understand that you get the minimum deviation when the angle of incidence is same as the angle of emergence. Keep it as a thought for now. We'll explain it later sometime in the detailed videos, that why for minimum deviation I has to be equal to E. But there are some important points that you should know about prism right now. The first point, listen to it carefully. For I equals to X, if the angle of incidence is X, if E equals to Y, if the angle of incidence is X and angle of emergence is Y, then for angle of incidence equals to Y, angle of emergence is equal to X. For example, if you have a prism and you shoot a ray of light such that the angle of incidence, the angle made by it with the normal, is let's say 50 degree. And you find that for such a case, the angle of emergence is 30 degree. Then if you shoot the ray of light at an angle of 30 degree, then when it finally comes out, it will come out at an angle of 50 degree. So for I equals to X, if angle of emergence is Y, then for angle of incidence equals to Y, the angle of emergence is X. This is the first thing you should know about prism, and this is very obvious. Why? So from the principle of reversibility. If you are shooting at 30 degree and getting the final ray out at angle of 40 degree, then if you shoot at an angle of 40 degree, it should finally come out at an angle of 30 degree. So that's the first thing you should know. The second thing you should know, and it's really important, is this. For minimum deviation, for a prism to show minimum deviation, this happens under the condition when you keep the value of angle of incidence such that the angle of emergence is same as the angle of incidence. Once more, you get the minimum deviation for such a value of angle of incidence such that the angle of emergence is same as the angle of incidence. This is the second condition, which is important condition which you should know. And the third condition is again important. The maximum deviation is when either the angle of incidence or the angle of emergence is 90 degree. If the ray is finally coming out of the prism in the normal fashion, then for maximum deviation, either the incident ray should make an angle of 90 degree with the normal, or the emergent ray should make an angle of 90 degree with the normal. So once we have learned these three conditions, let's see more about prism. So first, let's talk about maximum deviation. We have just learned that we get maximum deviation when the angle of incidence is 90 degree or the angle of emergence is 90 degree. We can keep any one equal to 90 degree from the first statement. If I equals to x and e equals to y, then for I equals to y, e equals to x. So one of them should be equal to 90 degree. Now beta, visualize the prism in such a fashion. So if let's say we keep the angle of incidence as 90 degree, and let's say the ray undergoes the first refraction and then it undergoes the second refraction. Can you tell me what will be the value of R1 if you hit the ray of light at grazing angle? That is, the angle of incidence is 90 degree. Then can you tell me what will be the value of R1? Sir, for such a condition, if the angle of incidence is 90 degree, R1 has to be equals to C. Why? Sir, if you have got rarer medium, if you have got denser medium, if the ray of light travels in the denser medium at critical angle, then after moving into the rarer medium, it moves parallel to the surface. So this angle is 90 degree. Then sir, from the principle of reversibility, if in the rarer medium a ray of light moves parallel to the surface, then after moving into denser medium, it will move at an angle equal to critical angle. So if you hit the ray of light in such a way that I equals to 90 degree, then R1 will be equal to critical angle. Now beta, if R1 will be equal to critical angle, can you tell me what will be the value of R2? That we know that R1 plus R2 has to be equals to apex angle. If you have I equals to 90 degree, then R1 will be equals to C. So C plus R2 will be equals to A. Or I can say that the angle of refraction on the second surface will be nothing but A minus C. So R1 will be equals to critical angle, and hence R2 will be equals to A minus C. If we apply Snell's law on the emergent surface, on the second surface, then I can say that for such a condition, using the Snell's law, I will say that mu sine R2 equals to 1 sine E. So we can say that mu equals to sine E upon sine of R2, and in place of R2 kids you can write A minus C. So you get sine E upon sine of A minus C. Now once you have found E using this formula, you know that I is 90 degree, E we can find from Snell's law, and A we already know, that is the apex angle. So the overall deviation maximum comes out to be I plus E minus A. If you get these type of question that the ray is hit such that the deviation is maximum, then better take I equals to 90 degree, find out E using the Snell's law, and then the deviation will be 90 plus E minus A. Now this case is not that important. The important case is the case of minimum deviation. So now let's talk about minimum deviation. This is really important. We have already learned that the minimum deviation takes place when I equals to E. If you choose the angle of incidence such that the angle of incidence becomes equals to the angle of emergence, for such a condition the deviation undergone by the ray is minimum. Now beta, if I will be equal to E, then R1 also has to be equals to R2, because I can say 1 sine I equals to mu sine R1, applying Snell's law on the left surface, and then applying the same Snell's law on the right surface, I will say mu sine R2 equals to 1 sine E. For minimum deviation, I has to be equal to E. So 1 sine I has to be same as 1 sine E. Hence mu sine R1 has to be same as mu sine R2. Mu get cancelled. Sine R1 has to be same as sine R2. Hence R1 has to be same as R2, and that's why we have written both of them as R. If beta R1 will be equal to R2, what will be their value? So sir, we know that R1 plus R2 equals to A. And for the case of minimum deviation, I and E are equal. R1 and R2 are equal. So both of them must be equal to A by 2, A by 2, so that their sum becomes equal to A. So remember that for minimum deviation, the angle of incidence should be same as angle of emergence, and R1 will be equal to R2, and that will be equal to A by 2. So for minimum deviation, you just need to remember this condition. From here, you can start getting everything. Now we can even say that when the ray undergoes minimum deviation, I equals to E, R1 equals to R2 equals to A by 2. Refracted ray inside the prism is parallel to the base of the prism. You can see it clearly in the diagram. It has to go symmetrically. So it will be parallel to the base of the prism. So the refracted ray inside the prism is parallel to the base of the prism. Second thing, bachcho, R can be written as A by 2, and we know that the deviation equals to I plus E minus A. For this case, I and E are equal and the deviation is minimum. So I can write delta minimum equals to, in place of E, I will write I again. So I plus I minus A, because for minimum deviation, I is equal to E. So I will write the minimum deviation equals to 2I minus A. Or we can say that I comes out to be equals to, so 2I will be equals to delta minimum plus A, or the angle of incidence for minimum deviation has to be delta minimum plus A by 2. So I equals to A plus delta minimum by 2. We can say more things. Now using the Snell's law, we can say that mu has to be equals to, from Snell's law we will say that mu sine R equals to 1 sine E. So you can say that mu equals to sine E by sine R. For the case of minimum deviation, here you can either write E or I, because both of them are equal. So you can write it also as sine I by sine R. And for the case of minimum deviation, as R is same as A by 2, in place of R you can even write A by 2. So you will get sine I by sine A by 2. So you can write the refractive index to be same as sine I upon sine A by 2. And in place of I, you can write A plus delta minimum by 2. So the refractive index of this prism is nothing but sine of A plus delta minimum by 2, which is nothing but sine I upon sine R, which is sine of A by 2. Now this formula is used many a time to find the refractive index of the prism material. So this is important formula. Now we will talk about one special case. Sometimes in the question they will give you that the minimum deviation offered by this prism is equal to apex angle. So sir, if the minimum deviation offered by the prism is equal to apex angle, then what has to be the refractive index? So substituting in place of minimum deviation and angle A, you'll get mu equals to sine of A plus A by 2 upon sine A by 2. Yes sir. So this becomes sine of A plus A, sine 2A by 2. That becomes sine A upon sine A by 2. Yes sir. Now how to solve? Using sine 2 theta equals to 2 sine theta cos theta, I can say that sine A can be written as 2 sine A by 2 into cos A by 2 divided by sine A by 2. Beta, cancel out sine A by 2, sine A by 2 in numerator and denominator. So for this special case, if the lens shows minimum deviation equal to apex angle, then the refractive index of lens is nothing but 2 cos A by 2. So this is one result which is asked many a time. So I have kept it here as a data point itself. Now moving on to the next thing, which is normal incidence on a prism. So what is the meaning of normal incidence on a prism? It means that the angle of incidence is 0. So the incident ray is normal to the surface. So if the light ray incident normally on any surface of the prism as shown, then it's called normal incidence. So if the ray of light is incident normally on first surface, if the ray of light is incident normally, then angle of incidence will be 0. If beta angle of incidence will be 0, can you tell me what will be the value of R1. So sir, if I is 0, R1 also have to be 0, because you have hit this ray normally, so it won't bend at all. It won't go away from the normal. It won't go towards the normal. It will pass on straight. So R1 will also be equal to 0. If beta R1 is 0, can you tell me what will be R2? Sir, we know that the sum of the internal refracting angle is A. If R1 is 0, it means that R2 has to be same as the apex angle. Now, here there can be two cases. Case 1, that the incidence angle is 0, or case 2, that the emergent angle is 0. Because we have learned that from the principle of reversibility of light, if I equals to X and E equals to Y, then if I is kept equal to Y, then E comes out to be equal to X. So either they give you this case that the incident ray hits normally, or they give you this case that the final emergent ray comes out normally. Both are same cases. For the first case, R1 will be 0 and R2 will be equal to A. For the second case, you will say that R2 will be 0 if the final emergent ray comes out normally, and R1 will be equal to A. Now for these two cases, they will ask you what is the refractive index of prism. So it's very easy to find. So in any of the above case, you will say that mu equals to sine of I or E upon sine A. Sir, how do you get this? Think of the first case. For this case, applying the Snell's law on the second surface, you will say that 1 sine E equals to mu sine R2. And for this particular case, if the incident ray is normal, R2 equals to apex angle. So you will say that sine E upon sine R2 or sine A has to be same as refractive index. Or if you use the same thing and apply Snell's law on the left surface, when the emergent ray comes out normally, here rather than substituting E, you will substitute I. So the refractive index for these two cases is nothing but sine of I or E, whichever one is not 0, upon sine A. One more thing, beta. For these two cases, remember that the deviation comes out to be, for this first one, if I ask you what is the deviation, you will say, sir, the formula is I plus E minus A. For the first case, the angle of incidence is 0, so deviation is simply E minus A. If they give you second case in the question, which is same as first case from the principle of reversibility. For the second case, if you think deviation equals to I plus E minus A, for the second case, E is 0, so you get deviation equals to I minus A. So just remember, for these two cases, deviation is simply I or E minus A, depending which one is non-zero. For the first case, substitute E. For the second case, substitute I. Now, there is one more case which is asked so many times in so many competitive examination, and the case is when you hit a ray of light on a prism whose second surface has been silvered, the ray retraces its path. Then you have to tell what is the refractive index of this prism material. So, how to solve this particular question? So again, this case is same as the second case. It's just that you have silvered the surface. When the ray retraces its path, it means that it has hit the mirror normally, just like in the second case. So using the same formula, you will say that mu has to be equal to sine I by sine A. In the question, they will give you definitely I and A, and this is one of the FAQs, frequently asked out question. Moving on to the grazing emergence and TIR through a prism. Let's say you have a prism. So when a light ray falls on one surface of the prism, it is not necessary that it will exit out from the prism. Sometimes it gets totally internally reflected at the second surface. So it may or may not exit out as shown below. So think of the first case when the incident ray is incident normally. So you have got this case and the incident ray has been incident normally. That is, the angle of incidence is 0. Now for such a ray, when it reaches the second surface, there can be three cases. Case 1, the ray comes out. Case 2, the ray comes out but moves along the surface as it comes out. Or case 3, the ray gets reflected. For this ray to get reflected, the angle of incidence here should be greater than the critical angle. For the ray to move out in the normal fashion, this angle has to be less than the critical angle. And for this ray to move parallel to the second surface, once it comes out, this angle has to be equal to the critical angle. So let's take the three cases one by one. So for the ray to emerge out as in case 1, you will say that this angle R2 has to be less than the critical angle. And for this particular case, where you have got normal incidence, R1 is 0. So R2 has to be equals to A. So you can say that for this ray to come out, R2 has to be less than critical angle, or the apex angle has to be less than critical angle. And you can say that mu has to be less than cosec A. So from where do you get all these things? In place of critical angle, can I write sine inverse 1 by mu? Sine C equals to 1 by mu. So here I can write A has to be less than sine inverse 1 by mu. So you will say that sine A has to be less than 1 by mu. So mu has to be less than 1 upon sine A, and 1 upon sine A can be written as cosec A. So mu has to be less than cosec A for the light to come out as in the case of general emergence. Now let's think of the case 2. If you want the ray to come out parallel to the second surface, this means that this angle of refraction R2 should be equal to the critical angle. And for this case of normal incidence, R2 is same as the apex angle. So you will say that for grazing emergence, such that the ray coming out is parallel to the second surface, the apex angle has to be same as critical angle. And if you know that apex angle has to be equal to critical angle, you can say that mu has to be equal to cosec A. I'm not doing this again, how we got mu equals to cosec A. We got it the same way as we got this. Now for the third ray, if you want the ray on hitting the second surface to get TIR, then this angle of incidence R2 in the denser medium should be greater than the critical angle. And if the incident ray has incident normally, then R2 has to be same as the apex angle. So for the case of ray 3, for the ray to undergo total internal reflection, you will say that R2 has to be greater than critical angle, or for this case, apex angle has to be greater than critical angle. If apex angle has to be greater than critical angle, on substituting the value of C as sine inverse 1 by mu, you will finally get the condition that mu has to be greater than cosec A for this ray to get TIR. Sir, how do you remember all these things? See kids, for the ray to undergo total internal reflection, refractive index of prism should be high. The greater the refractive index, the more problematic it will be for the ray to come out. We say that diamond shines. Why? Because it has got high refractive index. So the light before it comes out, it undergoes many total internal reflection. So higher refractive index makes it difficult for the light to come out, right? So for TIR, mu should be greater than cosec A. If the refractive index will be greater than cosec A, the light won't come out. Mu has to be less than cosec A. For the general emergence, for the light to come out, the refractive index has to be less. So mu has to be less than cosec A. And for just grazing emergence, mu has to be same as cosec A. Now let's take out the second case, which is equally important. And the case goes like grazing incidence. Grazing incidence means that the incident ray is along the surface. If your incident ray is along the surface, you do not have guarantee that finally the ray will come out or not, or finally the ray will move parallel to the surface, or finally the ray will get TIR. So again, we will have to talk about three cases. But you need to understand here, if I becomes equals to 90 degree, can you tell me what will be the value of R1? If I becomes equals to 90 degree, what will be the value of R1? So sir, if I becomes 90 degree, then R1 will be same as the critical angle. What I told you guys just now, if you have got rarer medium and denser medium. if a ray of light moves parallel to the surface in the rarer medium, then when it is refracted into the denser medium, just the extreme case, it goes at an angle equal to the critical angle. So if you have got grazing incidence on the prism, then the angle of incidence is 90 degree and R1 will be equals to C. If R1 will be equal to critical angle, can you tell me what will be R2 equal to? Yes, sir. R1 plus R2 equals to A. If R1 will be same as critical angle, then R2 has to be same as A minus C. So for ray 1, we will say that if you want the ray to come out, this R2 should be less than the critical angle. Or rather than writing R2, you can write A minus C should be less than C. And if you want A minus C to be less than C, it means that A should be less than 2C. So for general emergence to take place, if you want this ray to come out in the normal way, then A has to be less than 2C. Now again substituting the value of C as sine inverse 1 by mu, I can write A less than 2C. So A by 2 less than C. So A by 2 less than sine inverse 1 by mu. Bringing the sine inverse to left hand side, we get sine A by 2 has to be less than 1 by mu, or mu has to be less than 1 upon sine A by 2, or you will say that mu has to be less than cosec A by 2. I'm not going to do it twice again. Okay, so this is the procedure. So if A is less than 2C, then mu has to be less than cosec A by 2. If we want the ray to come out in the way the ray 2 comes out, that is grazing emergence. For grazing emergence, we say that this angle R2 should be same as critical angle. And for this case, since I is 90 degree, R1 equals to C, R2 will be equals to A minus C. So for grazing emergence, we will say that R2 has to be equals to C. So A minus C should be equal to C, and A minus C equals to C means A equals to 2C. Now in place of C, substituting sine inverse 1 by mu and doing the same charade, we will get that mu has to be equals to cosec A by 2. The last case, if you want the ray to get TIR'd, then this angle R2 should be greater than the critical angle. R2 should be greater than the critical angle. And for this way of incidence of light, you know that R1 will be equals to C. So R2 will be equal to A minus C. So A minus C should be greater than C. So A should be greater than 2C. So if you want the light to undergo total internal reflection when it hits the second surface, A has to be greater than 2C. And if A is greater than 2C, I am not doing it, mu has to be greater than cosec A by 2. Now here comes one very important line. And this line is, if A is greater than 2C, if the apex angle is greater than 2 times of the critical angle, if A is greater than 2C, if the apex angle is greater than 2 times of critical angle, then no ray will come out of the prism. No matter what is the angle of incidence, no goddammit ray will come out of the prism. And this is called the condition of no emergence. So this is asked many a time. What has to be the value of refractive index so that no goddammit ray hitting the prism comes out of it in the normal fashion? It can definitely come out after getting TIR. So the no emergence condition tells us that for emergence not to take place, this ray should get TIR on the second surface, and for that mu has to be greater than cosec A by 2. This is important thing. That's why inside a box. So if A becomes greater than 2C, if the apex angle is more than double of the critical angle, then you do not see any emergence. Moving on and talking about thin prism. If we have a thin prism means that the apex angle is small. Then for such a prism, when you hit a ray of light, then the deviation you get is equals to mu minus 1 into A. Sir, how do you get this formula? See better. If you have got thin prism, then the angle of incidence will be small. Angle of emergence will be small, right? And for the left surface, we can say that 1 sine I equals to mu sine r1. For small value of theta, sine theta can be approximated to theta. So you can say that I equals to mu r1. In place of sine r1, I have written r1. In place of sine I have just written I. Similarly, for the second surface, when you apply the Snell's law again, you will say that 1 sine E equals to mu sine r2. And for small value of theta, sine theta can be approximated to theta. So you will say that E equals to mu r2. And you know that the deviation is nothing but I plus E minus A. So that can be written as, in place of I, mu r1, in place of E, mu r2 minus A. If you take mu common from the first two terms, you will get mu times r1 plus r2 minus A, and r1 plus r2 is nothing but the apex angle. So you get mu into A minus A, then take A common, you get A times mu minus 1. So you just need to remember this formula. This formula works for thin prism. So if you have a thin prism means that the apex angle should be small, 1 degree, 2 degree, 3 degree. Then for such a prism, the deviation is equals to mu minus 1 into A. Now we know that different color of light have got different refractive index. We know that the refractive index for violet is greater than the refractive index for red. So looking at the formula, tell me which one will deviate more if I hit here white light. So if you hit here white light, violet has got higher refractive index. So the value of mu minus 1 will be greatest for violet, and hence the deviation will be highest for violet. And the deviation will be least for red. So if you have a thin prism and you shoot white light over it, then since for violet the refractive index is highest, violet light bends the most and red light bends the least. Now when the light rays come out of the prism, they are separated into different colors. If you shoot white light, definitely you will get everything, but I am just showing you the two extreme colors. There is even indigo, there is even blue, there is even green between them somewhere. Now we define a quantity, and that is called the angle of dispersion. Angle of dispersion is the angle between the extreme red ray and the extreme violet ray. So this angle is the angle of dispersion, the angle at which the light is spreading out. So sir, how to find the angle of dispersion? It's quite easy. When you hit white light, it is nothing but mixture of all the colors. Now we know that from its original path, violet deviates the most, red deviates the least. We can say that this angle of dispersion is nothing but the deviation of the violet minus the deviation of the red. So keep it in mind, the angle of dispersion is nothing but the deviation shown by the violet color minus the deviation shown by the red color. And we know that deviation is nothing but mu minus 1 into A. So for violet, you will write the deviation as mu violet minus 1 into A. For red, you will write the deviation as mu red minus 1 into A. So when you substitute this data, and on opening the bracket, you will get mu violet into A minus A. Minus of mu violet into A, minus minus becomes plus, plus A. So this term of A and A get cancelled. So what you are left with is mu violet into A minus mu red into A. And when you take A common, you get theta equals to mu violet minus mu red into A. So bachcho, the angle of dispersion is nothing but mu violet minus mu red into A. For violet, the refractive index is higher. Now we need to talk about one more important quantity here, which works for thin lenses, and that is the dispersive power of the lens. We say that the dispersive power of the lens is defined as the angle of dispersion upon the mean deviation. And when we say mean deviation, we think of a color between red and violet, and the color we have chosen is yellow. So the definition of dispersive power goes like: dispersive power equals to angle of dispersion upon mean deviation. Mean deviation is the deviation shown by yellow light. And we know from the deviation formula, deviation is nothing but mu minus 1 into A. And we know from the dispersion formula, angle of dispersion is nothing but mu violet minus mu red into A. So substituting the value of angle of dispersion and mean deviation, we will say that the dispersive power represented by omega equals to the angle of dispersion upon the mean deviation, that is the deviation for yellow light, and that will be equal to mu v minus mu r into A, that is the angle of dispersion, upon the mean deviation, that is the deviation for yellow light, so mu yellow minus 1 into A. So cancelling out A and A, you simply get the dispersive power of this prism to be nothing but refractive index of violet minus refractive index of red upon refractive index of yellow minus 1. But many a time in the question they will ask you to find the dispersive power, and they will only mention the refractive index of violet and red. They won't mention the refractive index of yellow. Then how to solve such a question? We say that out of the visible light, violet has the highest refractive index, red has the least refractive index. The refractive index of yellow lies somewhere between them, and we take the refractive index of yellow to be their average. So we say that we can approximate the refractive index of yellow to be the average of the two extreme refractive index, that is the refractive index of red and refractive index of violet. So we say that refractive index of yellow equals to refractive index of red plus refractive index of violet by 2. So on substituting this data here, you can even say that the dispersive power is nothing but refractive index of violet minus refractive index of red upon refractive index of yellow minus 1, and in place of refractive index of yellow you can substitute refractive index of violet plus refractive index of red by 2, and there is a minus 1 as well. So this is the formula of dispersive power. Now let's move on to the last topic, that is combination of prism. Kids, I always say one thing: to be good in physics you have to be good in only two things. First, basic maths, second, theory. I know that many of you might be complaining that sir, you are only teaching more of theory and taking lesser and lesser numericals in the lecture. I complete out most of the numericals by the way of theory. A child can't solve a numerical unless they know the theory behind it, right? So beta, I know the importance of theory. I have taught many a kids, and I'm not boasting or something, but from my personal experience I know that theory matters the most, and that's why I say if a child is capable of cracking NEET, they have got sufficient IQ that if they know the theory, they will be able to apply it. So focus on theory, focus on basic maths, rest is done. So now, finishing off the last topic, that is combination of prism. So two prisms made up of ground glass or flint glass material are combined to get either dispersion equal to 0 or to get deviation equal to 0. If you want only dispersion, you don't want deviation. You want only dispersion, you don't want deviation, then make the net deviation equals to 0. And if you want only deviation, you want no dispersion, then make the dispersion equals to 0. How to do? Let's see. So here, when we combine the prisms, sometimes we just want deviation, sometimes we just want dispersion, the light to split but not to deviate. So the first case, dispersion without deviation. The name itself is dispersion without deviation. So the light will disperse. So different colors will come out, but there will be no net deviation. So all we need to do is we need to make the net deviation 0. So we take two prisms, place them in such a way. Let's say the apex angle for first prism is A, the apex angle for second prism is A dash. The refractive index of violet and red for the first prism is mu v mu r, and the refractive index for violet and red for the second prism is mu v dash and mu r dash. The first condition we are learning is the condition when you want to have dispersion without deviation. So you don't want deviation, right? If you want the ray of light not to deviate, just make the net deviation equal to 0. So just make the net deviation equals to 0. And from the deviation formula, we have learned that deviation is how much? So deviation is nothing but mu minus 1 into A. So whatever deviation is done by this first prism, The same magnitude of deviation should be done in the opposite direction by the second prism, so that the net deviation becomes 0. But sir, if I am writing here only mu, whose mu? Violet, red, whose mu? Beta, here you must substitute the refractive index of yellow, because you are trying to make the mean deviation 0. Okay. So all you need to do is this: deviation of the first prism should be equal and opposite to the deviation of second prism. So you will say that the mu yellow for first prism minus 1 into the apex angle of first prism equals to mu yellow for second prism minus 1 into the apex angle of second prism A dash. In place of mu yellow, you can substitute mu red plus mu violet by 2. So you will write mu red for the first prism plus mu violet for the first prism by 2 minus 1 into A equals to mu red for the second prism mu R dash plus mu violet for the second prism mu V dash by 2 minus 1 into A dash. So you will get A dash by A equals to mu yellow minus 1 for the first prism upon mu yellow minus 1 for the second prism. And if they do not give you mu yellow in the question, simply substitute mu violet plus mu red by 2 for that prism. Now the second condition they ask in the question is deviation without dispersion. So they want the ray to deviate but not to disperse. The colors should not spread out. That's why this type of combination is called achromatic combination. If you shoot in white light, the final light coming out will be white because you don't want dispersion. So for such a case, again, we have to use two prisms. Whatever is the dispersion produced by the first prism, the same amount of dispersion should be produced by the second prism but in opposite direction. So for such a condition, simply make the net dispersion equal to 0. Just make the net dispersion equal to 0. And we know that dispersion is what? The angle of dispersion is nothing but mu violet minus mu red into A. So equate it for both the prism. The dispersion for first prism is mu violet minus mu red into A. For second prism, it is mu violet dash minus mu red dash into A dash. So you can write that A dash upon A equals to mu violet minus mu red for the first prism upon mu violet minus mu red for the second prism. Now that's all in this hour. See you guys in next hour, where we are going to talk about something which is everybody's pain point, optical instrument. See you guys in next hour. Bye bye. So that's all for now. See you guys in the next hour.